Welcome back to HBCU Pulse Radio. So listen, we've been talking about politics and the intersection of politics, government, and HBCUs for a long time on HBCU Pulse Radio, and we specifically have been talking about it these past couple of weeks. So I have the honor and the amazing opportunity to speak with a Congresswoman. This is probably one of the biggest interviews I've ever done. I have Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, who represents Washington's 10th Congressional District, and she's a Clark Atlanta University alumna, which is special to me because I went to Fort Valley State University, so Georgia HBCU love. It is amazing. Ms. Strickland, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Randall, and thanks for having me on today. I'm thrilled to be here with you to talk about this very, very important topic. I also serve as secretary for the Congressional Black Caucus. I'm a proud member of the bipartisan HBCU caucus. And so I want to hear your questions about what are you hearing on the ground? And then I'll give you my take on what I think we can do better in Congress and ask this administration do to support our HBCUs.
Yes, most definitely. So really, let's get to it because it is a lot that's going on in this is politically charged time.
Right.
Of course, we have the GOP proposals to cut Medicaid, SNAP, and other essential programs. And really what I've been trying to do, amongst many things, is trying to brief HBCU students and alumni and supporters about how this affects them. So 75% of students at HBCUs, they rely on Pell Grants to afford their education. And these GOP cuts actually threaten to stop that, to drastically cut that. So could you explain how these cuts will prevent Pell Grant recipients from receiving all the money they need to go through college?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And, I want to high level this for a second, because what you've seen this administration do in a very short period of time with no Republicans standing up to them is basically try to decimate the middle class. And I want you to think about the fact that they started attacking federal workers, civil servants. A lot of folks are educated. They were educated at HBCUs. And you know this, for a lot of folks, especially from our African-American community, we were told when we were young growing up, it's like, get yourself a good government job. It pays well, you have benefits, and you can retire with dignity. Then they said they want to get rid of the Department of Education, where that's where Pell Grants reside. And so as we're looking at Pell Grants, they are so essential and so important to help pay tuition for African-American students. Often Pell Grants are helping first-time students. They're often helping students who may come from low-income families, but a lot of Black students rely on Pell Grants to help pay tuition.
Yes, and this GOP tax proposal that you all are debating and trying to figure out, it also includes taxing student scholarship and letting student loan interest grow while students are still in school. And I know for me, I am a young alumni. I graduated 2019. Student loans aren't fun. So let's just break this down. What does this mean for college students, these college graduates that just walked the stage these past couple of weeks in May, and also first generation college students attempting to break these cycles of poverty and really increase their wealth for their family?
I really appreciate that you talked about wealth building. And that is one of the foundations of what the Congressional Black Caucus is doing. We want to help build wealth through housing, jobs, and justice. So when you look at what they are doing to make it more expensive to go to college, or to have graduates now leave college with this mountain of debt and jacking up interest rates, this is not helping us build intergenerational wealth. And I think there's a deeper problem here that we all have to ask ourselves. Why is it so expensive to go to college? And why is it allowable for students to enter into these contracts with predatory lending? And so I want to look at, the relief that we can provide for students when it comes to their debt for paying for college. But I think there's a bigger question about the structure of how we pay for college and what we're asking young people to take on, and their families as well. But I would say that, as we look at moving forward, we want to make sure that we are standing up, that we are speaking out. I said earlier in this show that I belong to the bipartisan HBCU caucus. And what that means is that there are Republicans with HBCUs in their districts, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon this caucus to come speak out in a unified manner and say, you can't do these to students and you can't hurt HBCUs like this.
I think that advocacy is incredibly important, especially as we look at how HBCUs have been affected in the first portion of this year. Because we look at FAMU, they just lost a $16.2 million grant. We saw in an Inside Higher Education article that Morgan State, they lost a Department of Defense grant, and you had the president, David K. Wilson, that had to pay out of pocket to bring students on campus, which was amazing, but he shouldn't have to do that. So how do you see these cuts shaping the future of HBCUs just more broadly? Because we know that HBCUs rely on a lot of federal funding, and even private HBCUs such as Clark Atlanta do as well. So what is the immediate future for our schools in this time?
Well, I mean, the immediate impact, sadly, is that fewer students will be able to attend HBCUs. When they do graduate, they will have higher amounts of debt, and they're cutting important programs. So the program you talked about with Department of Defense, I sit on the House Armed Services Committee. And one of the things that we did in our defense bill was we wanted to provide access and opportunities for HBCUs to engage in science and technology, because that's used a lot in the defense world. And we wanted our HBCU students to benefit from that. I would also say the other thing, and you know this very well, is that HBCUs for decades have been chronically underfunded. And during the Biden-Harris administration, because she's an alum of Howard University, we really elevated the profile of HBCUs, so much so that you had Democrats and Republicans kind of arguing like, no, I support them more. You know, you saw lots of money and federal support coming out of Congress going into HBCUs, which is important, right? And I always say to folks, it's one thing to give money, but how are they going to be able to sustain these programs that we're helping fund? And so I think right now with this administration, it's like they're trying to undo all the good work that the Biden-Harris administration did, all the investments that we made in HBCUs. And at the end of the day, it doesn't just hurt Black students, it hurts the entire community at large. And so I'm hopeful that we will take back the House in 2026 and Hakeem Jeffries will be our speaker. We will start to reinvest in HBCUs. And then we got to win in 2028, because going backwards is not an option for us when we're trying to build intergenerational wealth. And I will point out one thing, 95 million people did not vote in the last election. You heard me. 95 million people who were eligible to vote did not vote. So we have got to up our game, because we are living the consequences of people not showing up to vote or making bad choices.
Listen, that is so true. And rooting for some wins in 26 and 28 as well.
Yes.
Just know that. If you're just now joining us, we're speaking with Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, who represents Washington's 10th Congressional District, and she's a Clark Atlanta University alumna. I want to talk about the Donald Trump executive order on HBCUs, because that's something that I've been talking a lot about. I did an editorial on it on last week's edition of the show, because I was a White House HBCU All-Star. They call them the scholars now.
Right.
I served as a White House HBCU All-Star in the 2017-2018 school year during his first administration. So when I saw that executive order, for me, it was a red flag, but it was a lot of red flags went off, because I know sort of the verbiage, I know what's going on, and I know the program I served in didn't get established last month. You know, so I know there's certain things that happen that didn't just get established, but a lot of people are saying, hey, he did this, he did that. And even a lot of HBCU supporters are sort of confused, because it seems as if this is something that is a move to preserve and protect our institutions. So could you sort of break down what this executive order meant and what it actually is?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about politics, there are a lot of things that people do that I call performative, right? So you have an administration and a president who says, oh, yes, I support the African American community and I support HBCUs. And then they speak out the other side of their mouths and they say, diversity, equity, and inclusion are horrible for America. And they try to blame that on everything. And so for me, it's like, okay, put your money where your mouth is. If you say you're going to support something, then show it with funding, show it with financial support, because that's how you actually demonstrate that you care about the Black community. And I say to folks, you know, I'm not going to criticize us as people for how we vote. People are going to make decisions based on what they think is best. But you have to understand when you're being played. And I just think that it's so important here, as those of us who support HBCUs or alums, to understand that if anyone says they support HBCUs, then how much money are you putting behind in their support? If you say you support the African American community, then why are you trying to eliminate the Department of Education and tear down Pell Grants? Why are you trying to pull Medicaid from many families? Why are you trying to get rid of benefits that help hungry families get food? You're doing all these things that literally are the exact opposite of showing that you care for the African American community. And so it's about accountability. It's about making sure that when you say something, you follow through. And in the federal government, the best way to show you support something or an institution is to put your money where your mouth is. Actions, actions, not just words.
And I think the actions need to be working with Congress to make something actionable for funding.
Yep.
And that's something I know that we haven't seen. And I think one thing people forget, especially with the executive order, that Congress has the power of the purse.
Yes.
Like that's who's actually funding HBCUs and allocating that funding. That's the part that really is confounding to me. And it helps me out because a lot of people have been debating with me on Twitter. I have a lot of people like, yeah, well, listen, like Trump signed this executive order for HBCUs. I'm going to say, listen, a U.S. Congresswoman agrees with me, so I won.
You can say whatever you want, but what are you actually doing? Again, you mentioned this. In the last defense bill, we had tens of millions of dollars going to HBCUs. That's taking action. And so, again, if someone says they're going to do something, hold them accountable. I think that is the best way to do things. And in the meantime, we'll keep fighting for HBCUs. But again, this is part of the continuum of helping Black families and African Americans build intergenerational wealth because we have been denied it for so long.
I love that. And I love you talked about fighting, like you have Congress that's fighting for HBCUs, right?
Yep.
So under this administration, and especially these GOP proposals that are on the table, that's cutting Pell Grants, that's cutting and taxing scholarships, what realistic steps can Congress take to ensure HBCUs aren't left behind? Because I think what a lot of people are dealing with, and I know for me, I'm trying to get folks to understand, is that when it comes to you all's role, you all aren't activists. Like you all are legislators,
Right.
and you all have to abide by like what is here, like how they make with the House and the Senate and the executive branches. So what are you all doing to preserve and protect our HBCUs, and what is the next step in the fight?
Yeah. So one of the challenges that we have right now as House Democrats is that we have a math problem. There are 215 House Democrats. You need 218 votes to move anything forward. However, you can still use your voice and still use your pulpit. So I said earlier, there is a bipartisan HBCU caucus. And so look at some of the Republicans who actually represent HBCUs and hold them accountable. Are you going to vote for this cut to Pell Grants that help African American students? Are you going to take money away from this HBCU in your district, sir? Are you going to actually make your actions match the rhetoric that comes out of your mouth? Again, this is about accountability. So while Democrats are technically powerless when it comes to legislation, we can still hold people accountable. But I think another thing's important too, the power of litigation. The Democrats and their partners are suing the Trump administration left and right. And when we go to court, we tend to prevail 92% of the time. Now, the challenge here, honestly, is that even when we win in court, they don't obey the court orders. And the challenge is, what is the Department of Justice going to do? This Department of Justice? Really? And so I think we have to be realistic and honest, but the fight doesn't stop, right? As Leader Jeffries always remind us, we stay in the game. It's a long slog. We can never get tired. And, you know, anytime we get access to anything or we win hard-fought rights, there is always someone or some entities that want to take that away from us because they view the world in a certain lens and we are not in the middle of it or on top of it. So we have to keep fighting. We have to use our voices and we have to communicate and give people accurate information. There is so much garbage out there in the blogosphere, in the podcast world, and what people are posting and what you read. And sometimes it's hard to distinguish what's true and what's false. So be a discerning consumer of information. Get the facts first. Make people bring receipts when they make some claim that is patently false. The next election for the House will be in a year and a half. That will come in the blink of an eye. And this is where we always do show up to vote and use our voice and our power. But you can't sit at home and sit an election out and then complain about what happens. You got to get in the game. You got to get engaged. And we have to show up like we never have.
Exactly. Like we have to get in the game. And for everyone that's just tuning in, we're speaking with Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, who represents Washington's 10th Congressional District and is a Clark Atlanta University alumna. So there's a lot of HBCU students, HBCU alumni, and HBCU supporters that, of course, are private citizens, like they're not in political office. And they're looking to find a way to fight and make their own change. So what is some of your advice for how HBCU supporters can mobilize and rally to protect what we have?
You know, there's a lot of conversation within the Democratic Party, and people have accused us of everything from being out of touch, from even being elitist. And, that word is very loaded in our community because there's a connotation with the word uppity. But regardless of that, I would say there are three things we need to do. I talked about the 95 million people who didn't bother to vote. I promise you that we all know who some of those people are. This is not about shaming anyone, but we have to have conversations with our friends, our families, and say, okay, we need you to show up in this election. So voter outreach within your own social circle. And again, not shaming anyone, but saying this election is going to determine whether this country moves forward and the fate of our population, our people. I would say the second thing we need to do too is, again, get the facts, be a discerning consumer of information, and bring receipts. I think that's so important. I think there's another thing that's very important. I probably should have put that at number one. We have to engage in self-care. And I think for our community, we are so used to running around, taking care of everyone else, feel like we have to prove ourselves that it becomes physically and emotionally exhausting. So it's okay to say, no, thank you. It's okay to say, I don't want to do this right now, but take care of yourself, your emotional health, your physical health. Love the people around you. But I think sometimes when everything is so chaotic, we feel like we have to do everything for everyone. You got to put yourself first. And when you're on an airline, what do they say during a crisis? Put on your own mask first to make sure you're getting your oxygen before you help anyone else. So those are the three things that I would suggest that we can do as a community that will absolutely have an impact on the outcome of the elections in 26 and 28.
I love that. I love that. So one thing that I know that we talk about often is how it seems like we're in an information vacuum where
Yes.
you have like some of us that are really engaged in politics, but a lot of folks sort of aren't. And I think they're getting a lot of misinformation.
Yes.
Everybody's not watching C-SPAN. I watch C-SPAN. I have it on my phone. I
Right.
listen to it as I'm working, listening to CNN and things like that. But a lot of people I need to know what's happening in this fight in Congress with this specific GOP bill. So just, as of right now, like what's going on? Because I've heard that there are some members of the other side that are not cool with the different cuts and what's happening, and things are sort of stalled. So as of right now, what's happening, what's occurring, and also what's next on that front?
So if you watch TV and you're paying attention to the political bubble because you're part of it, I'm on your show. And if you look at things, it's like, oh my God, Democrats and Republicans are so divided. They're never going to come together. We're never going to move forward. Behind the scenes, Republicans know this is wrong. And there are even Republicans who have said, I can't cut Medicaid out of my district because 70% of the people who get health care get it through Medicaid. A hospital was shut down. So it's not as though they're not aware of it. But I come back to this whole conversation about we have to hold them accountable. If the only thing that we do is say to Democrats, you aren't doing enough, we're letting them off the hook. And they do not deserve to be let off the hook. So you need to come after Republicans, even if they don't represent your district, because every vote they take will have an effect on your livelihood. The other thing that's important too, for those of us who are in the political bubble, is that we have to meet people where they are. When I talk about cuts to Medicaid, I don't run around saying Medicaid. I say they're trying to take away your health care. If you have an elder in a nursing home, they may not pay for that, and your elder has to come back home and get care. Who's going to take care of this person when we have to go to work every day and we don't have the nursing skills to do what we need to do? They're trying to take food away from hungry children. How are kids supposed to do well in school when they show up hungry? And so I always tell folks, there's a policy, there's the institution, but what is that going to do to everyday people? When we're talking about, for example, Pell Grants and jacking up the interest rate, how's that going to affect your ability to pay rent? How's it going to affect your ability to afford basic necessities and even buy a car if you have to drive to work every day? So I always take everything and I make it real about how it affects people's daily lives, because what they're doing right now is that they're trying to undermine our livelihoods, our ability to have economic stability. And that is not by accident. And so again, talk about how this affects regular people every day. Own a small business? It's going to be harder for you if you have any materials and you have to pay these high taxes because of these tariffs. So again, I always try to make it like what is real for someone's daily life, especially someone outside of our bubble and honestly, outside of our HBCU bubble.
And that's really important. And I hope that when this interview comes out and it airs, hope people really listen, because I think you really put a lot of things into perspective about what's going on in this administration and also what needs to be done. And I really appreciate you for coming on. The last question I have for you is please let everyone know where they can follow you on social media and how we can support you and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. So my Twitter or X handle is Rep Strickland Wa. I am on Instagram. I'm on, what's the other one called? Is it Threads?
Threads, yeah.
whatever that is. Yeah. And then also, the old standard Facebook. And so, follow us on those. Instagram is actually the place where we tend to be more visible. But again, Rep Strickland, Washington, look us up, follow us. And, if you have any suggestions as you are watching these things unfold, feel free to reach out to my office and let us know what you want to see this administration do. Because I tell folks, I didn't vote for this president, but I have to work with them. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So make sure that we are very vocal and unapologetic about what our community needs and hold people accountable if they don't do it.
Most definitely. We have to make sure to hold people accountable. And I know on this show, I stay holding people accountable, and we're going to make sure that we continue to fight for change. And you really just helped us out tremendously just with this interview and putting things into perspective for us. So Congresswoman Strickland, thank you so much for coming on. You're listening to HBCU Pulse Radio.
Thank you so much.
Like what you hear?
Yeah.
Subscribe to HBCU Pulse Radio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head to HBCUPulse.com to stay up to date on what's going on in the HBCU community. Thank you for listening to HBCU Pulse Radio.